The public square of Nexus Station shimmered under the artificial light of three suns. Commander Marcus Reynolds stood with his back rigid, hands bound by quantum shackles that bit into his flesh. Technology so advanced it might as well have been magic to humans just 30 years ago. Now it was merely another tool of oppression. Overhead, the vast dome of the Dracorian flagship Eternal Dominion blotted out the stars. Its shadow had covered Earth for 7 years, since the day the aliens had arrived, offering technological marvels in exchange for partnership. That partnership had quickly devolved into subjugation. The Dracorians, 12-foot-tall beings with iridescent scales and multiple sets of articulated limbs, moved through the crowd with the casual arrogance of absolute rulers. Their translucent inner membranes flickered with bioluminescent patterns that humans had learned to recognize as amusement. Today, they were very amused. Supreme Overseer Thax Vol glided forward on his gravity platform, his primary eyes fixed on Reynolds. Unlike the other Dracorians, whose scales shimmered in blues and greens, Thax Vol's hide gleamed obsidian black, the mark of the ruling bloodline that had conquered 17 solar systems before Earth's. Commander Reynolds, the alien's voice resonated through implanted translators in every human ear. You stand accused of sabotage, sedition, and the theft of Dracorian technology. How do you respond? Reynolds lifted his gaze, meeting those alien eyes without flinching. I respond that humans were not meant to be cattle. A ripple of tension passed through the assembled humans. Miners, technicians, and servants gathered by Dracorian decree to witness the execution. 5,000 souls, a microscopic fraction of humanity's remaining population, but each one a potential spark. Thax Vol's feeding tentacles twitched with what Reynolds recognized as pleasure.
Interesting.
After 7 years, you still cling to the delusion of equality. Your species hasn't even achieved unified quantum field manipulation. You barely mastered nuclear fission before we arrived. By what measure could you possibly consider yourselves our equals? By the measure that matters, Reynolds said. We recognize our place in the universe. The Overseer made a dismissive gesture. Your place is to serve. Your resources fuel our expansion. Your labor maintains our fleet. This is the natural order. The strong command. The weak obey. Those who cannot accept this order must be removed, as cancerous cells are excised from healthy tissue. Behind Reynolds, Dr. Elaine Wright, his wife of 15 years, stood with their daughter Sarah between cordons of Dracorian guards. Elaine's face was a mask of controlled rage. Sarah's eyes were wide with terror and confusion. They hadn't been allowed to speak to him before the trial. The Overseer activated a holographic display showing Reynolds infiltrating a Dracorian research facility, extracting data cores containing propulsion schematics, and transmitting them to an unknown location before his capture. The penalty for these crimes is death, Thax Vol announced. But first, enlighten us. What did you hope to accomplish? Your resistance cells are infiltrated. Your weapons are primitive. Your transmissions are monitored. What possible advantage could these stolen schematics provide? Reynolds smiled thinly. Understanding. Understanding? The Overseer's scales rippled with what humans had learned was laughter. What use is understanding to a species that will never be permitted to apply it? The crowd shifted uneasily. Among them stood James Foster, chief engineer of Earth's largest Dracorian mining operation, his face deliberately blank as he watched his old academy classmate face death. Only the slightest tightening around his eyes betrayed any emotion. Reynolds straightened as much as his restraints would allow. You've made a fundamental error in your calculations, Overseer. And what might that be, human? You mistake our adaptability for weakness, our diversity for disunity, our creativity for chaos? Reynolds' voice carried across the square. Humans don't evolve over millennia like Dracorians. We transform ourselves within generations. We thrive on obstacles. We learn from defeat. Thax Vol gestured dismissively. Poetic but irrelevant. Your species has been thoroughly studied, categorized, and contained. There are no variables we have not accounted for. Reynolds laughed, a sound so unexpected that even the Dracorian guards shifted their posture. That's your error. You think you're dealing with a constant, but humanity is a variable that cannot be fixed. The Overseer's patience visibly thinned. Enough. The execution will proceed. Bring forward the family. 2 guards pushed Elaine and Sarah toward the platform. No. Reynolds strained against his bonds. They had no involvement. This was my action alone. Precisely, Faxful said. And so they serve as the first part of your punishment, to demonstrate the consequences of individual action in a collective society. Reynolds locked eyes with Elaine. In that moment, something passed between them. A code developed over years of resistance work, invisible to their captors. Her slight nod told him everything he needed to know. Your death would be insufficient, the Overseer continued. The human concept of martyrdom is well documented. Instead, you will watch as your genetic legacy is erased, and then you will serve the remainder of your natural life in the asteroid mines contemplating your failure. Reynolds felt his heart hammering as the guards raised their weapons toward his family. Thax Vol, he called out, his voice suddenly calm. Before you do this, there's something you should know. The Overseer paused, curiosity momentarily overriding his desire for the spectacle of punishment. Yes, there's a reason I allowed myself to be captured. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the alien's features. Explain. The data I stole wasn't the objective. It was the carrier. For the first time, genuine confusion registered in the Overseer's bioluminescent patterns. Carrier? For what? Reynolds smiled. Genuine and terrible. For the real weapon. The one thing your species never bothered to guard against because you thought it beneath you. The one thing we've been developing since the day you arrived. Vaxval raised a clawed appendage, signaling his guards. Silence him. Too late. Reynolds spoke the words that would echo across galaxies in the years to come. You should have killed us all when you had the chance. Because humans don't just adapt, we weaponize our adaptation. At that moment, across the Nexus station and throughout the Dracorian fleet, the first alarms began to sound. On 1,000 screens, Dracorian command symbols flickered and failed. The lights dimmed momentarily, then returned, but subtly altered in spectrum. What is happening? Thaxville demanded, turning to his subordinates. Reynolds watched with satisfaction as confusion spread through the Dracorian ranks. We infected your systems years ago? Not with code you could detect. You're too advanced for that. We infected it with concepts. Logical paradoxes, linguistic viruses that your translation matrices absorbed and have been incubating. Ideas that evolve. The crowd of humans began to murmur as the Dracorian guards' neural implants sparked visibly beneath their scales. Several of the aliens clutched their elongated heads, their movements becoming erratic. Impossible, Thaxville hissed. Our cognitive systems are impervious to direct attack. Yes, Reynolds finished for him, but not to evolution, not to ideas that grow. You made one critical mistake, Overseer. You gave us access to your language, believing we could never truly understand it. But understanding wasn't our goal. Transformation was. Throughout the station, screens flickered with rapidly evolving mathematical formulas. Human mathematics interfacing with and corrupting Dracorian certainties. The quantum shackles binding Reynolds suddenly disengaged, falling to the platform with a clatter. As chaos erupted across the square, Elaine pulled Sarah close and looked up at the faltering systems of the station. Foster moved through the panicking crowd toward them, along with dozens of other humans who had been waiting for this moment. Thaxvol's gravity platform wobbled dangerously as its control systems degraded. What have you done? He demanded. Genuine fear now evident in his voice. Reynolds stepped forward, free for the first time in months. We've done what humans always do when cornered. Overseer, we changed the rules of the game. Above them, the great engines of the Eternal Dominion stuttered and flared as the corruption spread from system to system, transmitted through the very quantum entanglement networks that made Dracorian technology so formidable. This is only the beginning, Reynolds said quietly, as the first tremors of liberation shuddered through the station. Today, you learn why every species that has ever tried to enslave humanity has eventually fallen. In the sudden darkness as the primary power systems failed, Reynolds took his wife's hand, nodded to Foster, and prepared to implement the next phase of humanity's long-planned insurrection. Around them, confusion reigned among the Dracorians, but the humans moved with purpose, with preparation, with understanding. The emergency illumination bathed the command deck of the Eternal Dominion in sickly amber light as Thaxval fought to comprehend the rapidly deteriorating situation. Holographic displays flickered with contradictory information, some reporting total systems failure, others showing impossible readings of energy signatures where none should exist. Isolate all affected systems, he barked at his subordinates. Quantum firewalls at maximum density. Purge all translation matrices and reset to base parameters. Sub-Commander Kelnar approached, his scales pulsing with stress patterns. Overseer, isolation protocols are failing. The corruption is evolving to bypass our countermeasures. Impossible, Thaxville hissed. Their technological understanding is rudimentary at best. The corruption doesn't appear to be technological in nature, Kelnar replied, mandibles clicking nervously. Our analysts describe it as conceptual, abstract. It's altering our base mathematical constants. Thaxville's primary heart quickened its rhythm. Where is the human Reynolds? Escaped during the power fluctuation. Security feeds show him moving with approximately 300 humans through maintenance shaft Delta 7. Seal all compartments. Deploy suppression units to the Overseer's command died in his throat as the main view screen suddenly activated of its own accord, displaying a live feed from within the station. Reynolds led the carefully assembled team through the narrow maintenance tunnels of Nexus Station. Unlike the pristine corridors designed for Dracorian physiology, these cramped spaces had been built by human hands, forced labor that the aliens had considered too menial for their attention. Status report? He called softly as they reached Junction Point 7. Foster emerged from a side passage, his engineer's tablet interfaced with exposed circuitry. Mimetic Cascade is at 63% penetration. Their quantum encryption is fighting back, but every defense they deploy gives our algorithm more patterns to work with. And the rest of the cell? Reynolds asked. In position. Dr. Nakamura's team has reached the atmospheric processors. Thompson's group is at the communication hub. Foster handed Reynolds a small device that pulsed with a soft blue light. And this just came online. It worked. Reynolds smiled grimly. 7 years of planning? Let's hope the rest goes as smoothly. Elaine approached, her medical scanner repurposed to track Dracorian life signs. They're mobilizing their suppression units, but the units are receiving contradictory orders. The corruption in their communication systems is more effective than we anticipated. Not corruption, Reynolds corrected. Evolution. Remember what the Dracorians never understood about us? We don't just adapt to our environment. We adapt our environment to us. Sarah, now carrying a pack of equipment, moved with the confidence of someone much older than her 14 years. Dad, I finished the modifications to the quantum resonators. They're tuned to the frequency you specified. Reynolds nodded, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Good work. Your mother said you have a natural talent for this. I had a good teacher, Sarah replied, glancing at Dr. Wright. We all did, Reynolds said, turning to address the gathered humans. Engineers, physicists, linguists, and others who had spent years preparing in secret. The Dracorians taught us everything we needed to know to defeat them. They just didn't realize what they were teaching. He activated a holographic display showing a schematic of the station. Teams Alpha through Delta, proceed to your assigned positions. Remember, direct confrontation is suicide. Stick to the shadows, use their arrogance against them. As the groups dispersed, Elaine stepped closer to Reynolds. The prisoners in Block E? Foster's secondary team is handling the extraction. If all goes well, 5,000 more allies will join us within the hour. On the command deck, Thaxville watched in growing horror as security feeds showed humans moving with impossible coordination through the station. What should have been a simple containment operation was unraveling before his 4 primary eyes. How are they communicating? He demanded. All human communication channels are being jammed. Science Officer Mevtan looked up from his analysis station, his normally composed demeanor shaken. They don't appear to be communicating, Overseer. At least, not electronically. Explain. They're following a plan. A complex, predetermined strategy with contingencies for every possible Dracorian response. Mevtan's feeding tentacles twitched nervously, as if they've been rehearsing this for years. Impossible, Thaxville said. But the conviction in his voice had weakened. They are primitives. Barely a Type 1 civilization. They couldn't possibly... The deck shuddered beneath them as a distant explosion rocked the station. Report, the Overseer demanded. Atmospheric Processing Center has been compromised. A subordinate replied, humans have introduced an unknown compound into life support systems. Thaxville felt his scales tighten in alarm. Is it toxic? Negative. It appears to be inert. Our sensors detect no harmful properties. Then why? The Overseer's question was interrupted as the lights on the command deck shifted subtly in spectrum, taking on a faintly reddish hue. Mevtan suddenly straightened, his posture rigid. The compound isn't the weapon. It's the carrier. Carrier for what? Thaxvol demanded. For them. Mevtan pointed to a microscopic readout. Terrestrial microorganisms, billions of them, engineered at the molecular level. Thaxvol stared in disbelief. Microbes? They attack us with bacteria? Not attacking. Overseer. Transforming. Mevtan's voice trembled. They're altering the molecular composition of our atmosphere scrubbers, changing the air to a mixture that is still breathable for Dracorians, but what? But it contains trace elements that interfere with our neural chemistry, specifically with the portions of our brains that process hierarchical thinking. Mevtan looked up, genuine fear in his bioluminescent patterns. They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to change us. In a repurposed maintenance bay, Sarah worked alongside a team of engineers, connecting a series of devices to the station's power grid. What the Drecurians had dismissed as primitive human technology had been carefully designed to appear unsophisticated. In reality, each component contained elements of Drecurian design that had been subtly altered, not to improve efficiency but to create specific patterns of failure when they inevitably broke down. Ready for Phase 3? She reported through a simple coded knock on a pipe. A communication method so archaic the Dracorians had never bothered to monitor it. Across the station, Foster received the signal and nodded to his team. Begin power fluctuation sequence? Throughout Nexus Station, human technicians who had spent years maintaining Dracorian systems executed a carefully choreographed series of minor errors, each one insignificant alone, but devastating in concert. What is happening to our power grid? Thaxvol demanded as the command deck systems fluctuated erratically. It appears to be failing in a pattern, a technician reported hesitantly. What kind of pattern? A mathematical sequence. Prime numbers, but with variations that don't correspond to any known mathematical model. Thaxvol's secondary heart began beating faster, synchronizing with his primary, a physiological response to extreme stress that hadn't been triggered since his battle trials. They're primitives, he whispered, but now the words sounded hollow even to his own auditory receptors. The main view screen suddenly activated, showing Reynolds standing in what appeared to be the station's central communication hub. Behind him, humans worked at Dracorian terminals with a familiarity that should have been impossible. Overseer Thaxvol, Reynolds said, his voice calm and measured. I thought we should have a conversation about the natural order of things. Thaxvol bristled. You cannot hope to prevail, human. Your insurrection will be crushed. Even now, the Imperial fleet approaches. Reynolds smiled. Yes, we're counting on that. In fact, we've been broadcasting a distress signal for the past hour, one that contains the same linguistic algorithms that are currently redefining your neural pathways. On a secondary screen, Thaxvol watched in horror as Dracorian crew members throughout the station began behaving erratically, some standing motionless, others moving with uncharacteristic fluidity, mimicking human gestures. What have you done to my people? The Overseer demanded. Nothing they haven't done to themselves, Reynolds replied. Your species has relied on rigid hierarchical thinking for so long that you've engineered it into your neural architecture. We simply introduced a concept your minds cannot process without fundamental restructuring. True recursive empathy. Thaxvol felt a cold dread spreading through his secondary nervous system. You speak nonsense. No, I speak human. That's the weapon you never saw coming. Reynolds leaned closer to the camera. 7 years ago, you forced us to learn your language, to understand your technology, to adapt to your dominance. And we did. But while we were learning to think like Dracorians, we were teaching your systems to think like humans. On the screen behind Reynolds, data streams showed Dracorian ships throughout the solar system, experiencing cascading system failures. Impossible, Thaxvol whispered. Our quantum encryption is based on mathematical certainties, Reynolds finished for him. But humans don't deal in certainties. We deal in probabilities, in approximations, in leaps of intuition. We introduced uncertainty into your perfect systems, and they're doing what all complex systems do when faced with uncertainty. They're evolving. In the bowels of the station, Elaine led a team through the prisoner blocks, freeing humans who had been captured during previous resistance attempts. Among them was Dr. Victor Harlow, a xenolinguist whose execution 3 years earlier had been carefully staged. The linguistic virus? She asked, as they moved through the corridors. Harlow nodded. Spreading faster than we projected? The Dracorian language has no concept for certain human ideals. They literally cannot think thoughts that their language cannot express. By introducing human concepts into their translation matrices, we've forced their minds to create new neural pathways. And the side effects varied. Some experience temporary synaptic paralysis. Others develop a form of synthetic empathy. He paused. A few seemed to be genuinely transformed. As if to illustrate his point, they rounded a corner to find a Dracorian guard standing motionless, its armored head tilted at an unnatural angle. As they approached cautiously, the alien turned to them, its bioluminescent patterns displaying an entirely new configuration. "I understand now," it said, haltingly in unaugmented human English. On the command deck, Thaxvol watched as his carefully constructed order collapsed around him. Reports flooded in of Dracorian crew surrendering to humans, of critical systems reconfiguring to human parameters, of the supposedly impenetrable quantum communication network spreading the contagion of human thought to every ship in the fleet. "You cannot win," he told Reynolds, but his voice lacked conviction. "The Empire spans 17 systems. This is but one station." "This is just the beginning," Reynolds replied. "Look at your long-range sensors, Overseer. What do you see?" Reluctantly, Thaxvol turned to the astronomical display. What he saw there froze his circulatory fluids. Throughout the solar system, at precisely calculated points, the supposedly primitive human ships that had been hiding in the Kuiper Belt were moving into position, each one pulsed with energy signatures that shouldn't have been possible with human technology. How? It was all the Overseer could manage. "We've had colonies beyond Neptune for decades," Reynolds explained. "Small, insignificant by your standards, but isolated. Developing. When you conquered Earth, you calculated that controlling our homeworld meant controlling humanity. That was your first mistake." The display zoomed in on one of the human ships, showing a design that incorporated elements of Dracorian technology, but arranged in configurations no Dracorian engineer would ever have conceived. "Your second mistake was believing that human technology progresses linearly. We don't evolve technology, we revolutionize it." A signal came through from one of the approaching ships. To Thaxvol's shock, it was piloted by beings that appeared to be neither fully human nor machine, but a synthesis of both. "Meet humanity's third generation," Reynolds said with quiet pride. "While you were busy putting us to work in your minds, our scattered colonies were integrating your technology with ours in ways your rigid minds couldn't imagine." For the first time in his 300-year existence, Thaxvol felt something he had never experienced before. A cold, creeping sensation that humans would call fear. Not the tactical awareness of danger that had served him in conquest across the stars, but a deep, existential dread. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Reynolds' expression hardened. "We want you to understand, Thaxvol. The same way we were forced to understand. Starting now." The screen went dark, and in that moment, surrounded by failing systems and confused subordinates, the Supreme Overseer of the Dracorian Empire finally understood the truth that would soon echo across 17 subjugated systems. They had never been the predators. They had always been the prey. Thaxvol stood at the observation dome of the Eternal Dominion, watching as the impossible unfolded before him. The vastness of space, once the canvas upon which the Dracorian Empire had painted its glory, now swarmed with vessels that defied categorization, not quite human, not quite machine, and incorporating Dracorian principles reconfigured in ways that violated what his species had long considered immutable laws of physics. "The Imperial fleet has entered the system," Subcommander Kelnar reported, his voice modulated to suppress the tremor of uncertainty. 6 dreadnoughts, 24 cruisers, and their support vessels. "Have they responded to our warnings?" Thaxvol asked. "No, Overseer. They continue on standard approach vectors. Our quantified alerts regarding the human infection aren't being acknowledged." Thaxvol's scales rippled with agitation. "They believe this is a simple insurrection to be crushed. They cannot conceive of anything else." On the tactical display, the Imperial fleet, the mightiest concentration of military power in 7,000 years of Dracorian history, moved with absolute confidence toward Earth. Their formation was textbook perfect, designed to maximize overlapping defensive fields while optimizing weapons coverage. Perfection was their first mistake. In the repurposed communication hub of Nexus Station, Marcus Reynolds watched the approaching armada with a complex mixture of emotions. The plan was proceeding faster than anticipated, but the cost would be measured in lives, both human and Dracorian. "Fleet transmission intercepted," Foster reported from his station. standard suppression protocols. They're planning orbital bombardment of major population centers to re-establish order. Reynolds nodded grimly. And our response? Dr. Harlow looked up from his workstation, where complex linguistic algorithms scrolled across multiple screens. Mimetic payload prepared. The carrier wave will transmit through their own communication network. What's the projected efficacy? Elaine asked. 87% initial penetration, Harlow answered. Once it reaches their central command node, the spread will be exponential. Reynolds took a moment to study the humans around him. Scientists, soldiers, technicians, and ordinary people who had endured 7 years of subjugation while quietly preparing for this day. Some, like Sarah, had grown up knowing nothing but Dracorian rule. Others, like Foster, had sacrificed promising careers to join the resistance. Begin transmission, Reynolds ordered, and may whatever gods they believe in have mercy on their souls. Aboard the Dracorian flagship Inexorable Justice, Grand Admiral Zex Moore received the first reports of anomalies with mild irritation. Communications experiencing minor fluctuations, his technical officer reported. Standard variance, likely atmospheric interference from the planet. Proceed with deployment, the Admiral commanded. Weapons platforms at full charge. Prepare target acquisition for human population centers. The bridge hummed with the efficient routine of an empire that had conquered worlds across 17 systems. The crew moved with practiced precision, their actions guided by millennia of martial doctrine. None of them noticed when the ship's translation matrices began interpreting commands with subtle alterations. None recognized when the targeting computers started calculating trajectories using parameters that differed from standard Dracorian mathematics by infinitesimal amounts. Differences that would compound with each passing second. By the time the first officer noticed that the flagship's course had deviated from the planned approach vector, the infection had already spread to 11 other vessels. Admiral, the officer reported, navigation systems are showing unexplained variances. Zex Moore frowned. Source? Unknown. Diagnostics report all systems functioning within normal parameters. But what, officer? The definition of normal appears to have changed. On Nexus Station, Daxville watched with growing horror as the mighty Imperial fleet began to move in ways that defied explanation. Ships altered course, seemingly at random. Weapons platforms powered down or redirected. Communication became increasingly fragmented. What am I seeing? He demanded. Reynolds' voice came through the communication system, no longer requiring hacking, as the station's AI had evolved to recognize him as an authorized user. You're seeing the end of certainty. Overseer, your empire is built on absolute control, perfect hierarchies, and immutable laws. We've introduced the one thing your civilization has engineered out of itself: doubt. On the tactical display, the Imperial fleet's formation had dissolved into chaos. Ships moved erratically, some firing weapons at empty space, others going dark completely. This is impossible, Thaxville whispered. No, Reynolds replied. This is human. We specialize in the impossible. In the void between Earth and Mars, the human hybrid vessels from the outer colonies moved with unprecedented coordination. What appeared to Dracorian sensors as random, inefficient movements was in fact a complex dance, each position calculated to amplify the effects of what humans had codenamed Uncertainty Cascade. Aboard the lead ship, Prometheus Unbound, Commander Diane Winters, once a brilliant physicist before the invasion, directed operations with the integrated neural interface that merged her consciousness with the ship's systems. Quantum resonance at optimal levels, she reported to Reynolds. The carrier wave has reached 93% of the Imperial fleet. Effects? Reynolds asked. Varied. Some vessels are experiencing total system failure. Others show signs of evolution. And the Dracorians themselves. Winter's voice held a note of wonder. The most remarkable part, their neural architecture is rewiring in response to the linguistic algorithms. They're beginning to think in concepts their language previously couldn't express. On the Inexorable Justice, Grand Admiral Zex Moore clutched his command chair as reality itself seemed to warp around him. The ship's displays showed information that couldn't possibly be correct. Humans with technology that rivaled or exceeded Dracorian achievements, impossible energy readings, and most disturbing of all, Dracorian vessels communicating in patterns that violated all established protocols. What is happening to our fleet? He demanded. His science officer stared at readings with 4 eyes widened in disbelief. They're changing, Admiral. The ships, their systems, even the crews, all transforming according to patterns I cannot identify. Is this some kind of weapon? A virus? No, sir. It's... The officer struggled to find words. It's evolution. Accelerated, directed evolution. They've somehow introduced a catalyst that's causing our technology and our people to evolve at rates that should be impossible. The Admiral's feeding tentacles contorted in distress. Halt the process. Purge all systems. We can't, sir. The process isn't in our systems. It's become our systems. The distinction between the original programming and the evolution is philosophical rather than technical. As the Admiral struggled to comprehend this report, a junior officer approached with trembling limbs. Sir, we've analyzed the carrier wave. It contains ideas. What kind of ideas? The Admiral demanded. Human ideas, sir. Concepts that have no direct translation in Dracorian language. Recursively self-referential paradoxes. Non-hierarchical organizational structures. Emergent consciousness paradigms. The Admiral's scales darkened in alarm. These are dangerous concepts. They undermine the very foundations of Dracorian civilization. Yes, sir, the officer agreed. That appears to be the point. In the observation dome, Faxvul watched as the mighty Imperial fleet, the physical manifestation of Dracorian supremacy, transformed before his eyes. Some ships were dark and drifting. Others pulsed with new energy patterns. A few had begun to physically reconfigure, their hulls flowing into new shapes that no Dracorian architect would have conceived. What have you done? He whispered. Reynolds' voice was calm. We've introduced your species to humanity's greatest weapon, Overseer, not our technology, not our numbers, not even our resilience. Then what? Faxvul demanded. Our capacity for change. Reynolds' voice hardened. 7 years ago, you forced humanity to adapt to Dracorian rule. We did. But while you saw our adaptation as submission, we were learning, evolving, becoming something new. On the tactical display, a new signal appeared. A transmission emanating from the transformed Imperial vessels. To Faxvul's shock, it wasn't a distress call or a battle plan. It was a conversation, Dracorians communicating with humans as equal. This is impossible, he insisted, though the evidence before his 4 eyes contradicted his every word. Dracorians do not change. Our evolutionary path has been stable for 50,000 years. Our neural architecture is fixed. Our hierarchical systems are immutable. That was true, Reynolds acknowledged. Until today, across the solar system, on 17 worlds that had known only Dracorian dominance for generations, something unprecedented was occurring. The quantum communication network that had been the Empire's greatest strength became the conduit for its transformation. Dracorian overseers found themselves suddenly capable of understanding concepts that had previously been neurologically impossible for them to process. Concepts like non-hierarchical cooperation, like recursive empathy, like the idea that evolution wasn't just a historical process but an ongoing, perpetual state of becoming. Some fought against these new thoughts, their minds breaking under the cognitive strain. Others embraced the change, experiencing a kind of awakening as neural pathways reconfigured to accommodate new ways of thinking. On Nexus Station, Reynolds led a delegation through corridors that had once been forbidden to humans. The station itself seemed different. The lighting adjusted to accommodate both human and Dracorian visual ranges, the atmosphere a carefully balanced mixture that suited both species' respiratory needs. They entered what had been Faxvul's private chamber, a space of opulence that reflected his status at the apex of a rigid hierarchy. The Overseer sat alone, his once commanding presence diminished, his scales dull and lifeless. Have you come to witness your victory? Faxvul asked without looking up. No, Reynolds replied. I've come to offer you a choice. For the first time, the Overseer raised his gaze to meet Reynolds' eyes. A choice? What choice remains for me? The same choice every human faces every day of their existence. Reynolds gestured to the humans and transformed Dracorians who accompanied him. The choice to evolve, to become something new. Faxvul's bioluminescent patterns flickered with confusion. I don't understand. That's the first step, Elaine said, stepping forward with a medical scanner. Your neural architecture is already changing, Overseer. Fighting it will only cause pain. What will I become if I allow this evolution? We don't know, Reynolds answered honestly. That's what it means to be human. We never know what we're becoming until we become it. Thax Vol's feeding tentacles twitched in what might have been amusement or despair. And this is how you defeated us? With uncertainty. With possibility, Reynolds corrected. Your civilization reached perfection millennia ago, and that was your downfall. Perfection is stasis. Stasis is death. The overseer was silent for a long moment, his compound eyes studying each face in the delegation. Finally, he asked, "The Imperial Core Worlds?" "One of them." Foster stepped forward, displaying a holographic representation of the 17 systems that comprise the Dracorian Empire. Throughout the network of quantum-entangled communication relays, the infection, or evolution, was spreading at an exponential rate. By our calculations, Foster said, 93% of all Dracorian systems will experience the change within 30 standard days. Some will resist. Many will adapt. And those who cannot adapt, Reynolds met the Overseer's gaze directly. We'll help them if they'll accept our help. That's also what it means to be human. 3 months later, Reynolds stood with Sarah at the observation deck of the newly christened Unity Station, the transformed remains of what had once been Nexus Station. Below them, Earth gleamed blue and green, its wounds from 7 years of occupation already beginning to heal. "Is it really over?" Sarah asked, watching as ships of hybrid design, part human, part Dracorian, part something entirely new, moved through the space around Earth. "No," Reynolds said honestly. "It's just beginning." Dr. Harlow approached, accompanied by a Dracorian whose scales shimmered with colors no human had seen before. The transformation. "The council is ready," Harlow announced. Reynolds nodded. "Thank you, Victor. And thank you, Thax." The former overseer, now bearing the title of liaison, inclined his head. His neural transformation had been among the most profound and complete of any Dracorian. The representatives from the outer colonies have arrived, and the delegation from the core worlds adjusting to their new perception. As they walked toward the council chamber, Thax Vol spoke in a voice that still carried traces of his former authority. "There is something I still do not understand." "Reynolds? What's that?" "You had this weapon, this capacity to transform us from the beginning. Why wait 7 years? Why endure our rule when you could have changed us immediately?" Reynolds stopped, considering how to explain a concept that even transformed Dracorian neural architecture might struggle to process. Because forced evolution isn't evolution at all. It's just another form of conquest. We needed to understand you completely before we could help you change. And you needed to understand us, to see us as thinking beings worthy of study rather than merely resources to be exploited. So my order to execute you publicly was the final catalyst we needed, not just to implement our plan, but to justify it morally. You gave us no choice but to change you. Thax Vol was silent for a moment, processing this with his transformed mind. "And now, what happens to my species now?" Reynolds smiled, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder as they entered the council chamber. A circular space where humans, Dracorians, and the new hybrid beings that some had begun calling evolutionaries gathered as equals. The same thing that happens to all living things in this universe. "Thax Vol, you continue to evolve. You continue to become." Behind them on the observation deck, Earth turned serenely beneath a sky no longer dominated by Dracorian warships. In orbit around the planet, the transformed vessels of what had once been the Imperial fleet formed a protective constellation, not conquerors, not even guardians, but partners in an unprecedented symbiosis, and far beyond the solar system. Across 17 worlds and countless stars, the message that had begun with one man's defiance in the face of execution continued to spread. Not as a weapon, not as a conqueror, but as an invitation. Evolve or perish. Change or fade away. Become something new, or cease to be anything at all. In the vastness of the cosmos, the truth that humans had always known and that Dracorians were only beginning to understand, echoed like a promise and a warning. The universe favors not the strongest species, nor the most intelligent, but those most responsive to change.